The colony of New Haven buzzed with its usual morning activity. Terraforming machines humming in the distance, hydroponic gardens glowing with artificial sunlight, and children playing in the carefully maintained atmospheric dome. Located on the edge of human space, it was humanity's newest achievement in colonization, a testament to their determination to spread among the stars. Commander Chen watched from his office window as colonists went about their daily routines. 6 months of peaceful establishment had given them confidence, perhaps too much. They weren't the first humans to establish colonies in this sector, but they were certainly the most remote. The nearest military outpost was 3 days away at maximum FTL speed. "Sir," his assistant's voice crackled through the comm. "Unknown signatures detected approaching the outer atmosphere." Chen straightened his uniform. First contact protocols had been drilled into every colonist's head since day one. "Alert status yellow. Get everyone inside their designated shelters. How many signatures?" "3 vessels, sir. Configuration unknown. They're not matching any known design in our database." Of course they wouldn't, Chen thought. Humanity had only encountered 2 other spacefaring races so far, and both encounters had been carefully orchestrated through proper diplomatic channels. This was different. The ships that descended through the colony's atmosphere were elegant in a disturbing way. Their hulls seemed to ripple like liquid metal, forming and reforming as they moved. The Morphids, as humans would later call them, had evolved from a species that could naturally alter their molecular structure, and their technology reflected this ability. "They're requesting landing clearance," the assistant reported. "Their communication patterns are unusual. The AI is having trouble translating." Chen took a deep breath. "Grant them clearance for Pad 3. Keep the others locked down. Alert Earth Command. Priority channel." The lead ship landed with impossible grace, its hull flowing into a more stable configuration. Chen watched as a section of the vessel simply melted away, forming an exit ramp. The beings that emerged moved like mercury poured from a bottle, humanoid in basic shape, but constantly shifting and flowing. "Fascinating," Chen muttered. His doctorate in xenobiology was screaming at him to take notes, but his military training kept his hand steady on the ceremonial sidearm at his hip. The Morphids approached the welcome center with what seemed like confidence, though reading alien body language was always tricky. 3 of them took the lead, their silver fluid bodies reflecting the morning sunlight in hypnotic patterns. "First contact protocols engaged," the colony's AI announced calmly. "Translation matrix adapting to new linguistic patterns. Caution, high uncertainty in translation accuracy." Chen straightened his shoulders and headed for the welcome center. Everything about this felt wrong. Unscheduled first contact, unknown species, remote location. But humanity had protocols for this. They had prepared for this. What they hadn't prepared for was the Morphids' complete disregard for those protocols, or their fundamentally different understanding of what constituted life. To them, solid matter was primitive, barely worth acknowledging. And solid matter that couldn't change its shape at will? Well, that wasn't really life at all, was it? Chen didn't know it yet, but he was about to witness the beginning of humanity's darkest hour, and its most terrifying response. The first sign that something was wrong came from the playground dome. Despite evacuation orders, a small group of children had remained behind, fascinated by the shimmering visitors. The Morphids noticed them immediately, their liquid metal forms rippling with what might have been curiosity. "Please," Chen started to say, but the translation matrix was still struggling with their language. The lead Morphid moved towards the dome, its form stretching and flowing like quicksilver. The children pressed their hands against the transparent barrier, eyes wide with wonder. What happened next would be replayed on every news feed across human space. The Morphid, seemingly trying to mimic the children's greeting, pressed its own fluid form against the dome, but instead of stopping, it began seeping through the molecular structure of the barrier. To the Morphids, solid barriers were merely suggestions, their fluid forms capable of passing through most materials. The dome's integrity sensors shrieked. Before anyone could react, the atmospheric seal was compromised. Warning klaxons blared as the precious air began to escape. The children screamed, their small bodies thrown about by the violent decompression. Time seemed to slow for Chen as he watched in horror. The emergency protocols kicked in, secondary barriers dropping from the ceiling, but for one child, little Raj Kumar, who had been closest to the breach, it was too late. The Morphids didn't understand. Their own bodies, capable of surviving in virtually any environment, made them immune to such concerns as atmospheric pressure or oxygen requirements. To them, this was merely an interesting interaction with primitive solid beings. They watched, their silver forms rippling with what might have been amusement, as emergency teams rushed to the scene. "What have you done?" Chen's voice boomed through the translation matrix, distorted by rage and grief. The lead Morphid's form wavered in what might have been confusion. "The solid child ceased movement," came the translated response, utterly devoid of concern. "A fascinating reaction. We had not realized your kind was so fragile. Perhaps you should modify your young to be more resilient." The medical team's desperate attempts at resuscitation failed. Dr. Kumar, the colony's chief physicist and Raj's father, held his son's lifeless body, his anguished screams echoing through the colony's corridors. The Morphids continued to observe, seemingly cataloguing this reaction as merely another interesting data point about solid life forms. They didn't understand what they had just done. They didn't understand that humans would view this not as an accident, but as the murder of a child. They didn't understand that they had just made the worst mistake any species could make. They had harmed a human child. As the colony's quantum communicator sent its faster-than-light message to Earth, the Morphids were still attempting to explain their scientific curiosity. They had no concept of the storm they had just unleashed, no understanding of the ancient human drive to protect their young. They were about to learn. Earth's response began with silence. Across every diplomatic channel, every commercial frequency, every cultural exchange network, humanity went quiet. The two alien species they had previously contacted, the Zern and the Valdi, immediately noticed the change. The usually chatty humans, known for their constant transmission of everything from scientific data to entertainment broadcasts, had suddenly gone dark. In the Sol system, something else was happening. Ships began moving, not the usual merchant vessels or civilian transports, but warships, lots of them. The massive orbital shipyards around Mars, which had been producing exploration vessels and colony ships, switched to military production with frightening speed. The United Earth Defense Council convened in their underground chamber in Geneva. They watched the footage from New Haven Colony exactly once. That was all they needed. "The vote stands at unanimous," Admiral Hong announced, her voice cold. "Initiative Nemesis is hereby activated." Around the table, representatives from every major nation nodded grimly. Humanity's various governments, which usually squabbled over everything from resource rights to cultural influences, found themselves in perfect agreement. The old saying, "mess with one human, mess with all of us," had never been more true. The Zern ambassador, watching from their embassy as massive warships began emerging from Earth's shipyards, sent an urgent message to their homeworld. "They're arming, all of them. I've never seen anything like this, the humans. They're not arguing anymore." Military bases across Earth and Mars hummed with activity. The newest Omega-class dreadnoughts, whose very existence had been classified until now, were brought online. Each one carried enough firepower to level a continent. Humanity had been holding back, presenting themselves to the galaxy as peaceful explorers. That mask was now being set aside. In orbit around Jupiter, the Quantum Weapons Research Facility began loading their prototypes onto ships. These weapons, developed in secret over decades, were capable of rewriting the laws of physics in localized areas. They had been deemed too dangerous to test, let alone use. Now they were being armed. The Valdi, historically closer to humans than other species, tried to establish contact through back channels. Their messages went unanswered, but they managed to hack into a low-level communications array. What they found, terrified them. Humans weren't just preparing for war, they were preparing for extinction-level combat. The colony of New Haven reports that the alien vessels are still in orbit, a junior officer reported to the Defense Council. The Morphids appear to be confused by our lack of response. Admiral Hong's smile was devoid of warmth. Let them wonder. Fleets 1 through 7 are almost in position. The Thanatos Protocol is ready for deployment. The Morphids, still orbiting New Haven, had begun to sense that something was wrong. Their attempts at communication were met with absolute silence. The colony below had sealed itself completely, its defensive shields, which they hadn't even known existed, now active. In homes and public spaces across Earth and its colonies, the news of Raj Kumar's death spread. There were no calls for revenge, no public demonstrations. Instead, humans hugged their children tighter and waited. They had seen this before, in their own history. They knew what came next. The Defense Council's final preparation was perhaps the most telling. They transmitted a single message to every human settlement, ship and station across known space. It contained just 5 words. The children are our future. This wasn't just a statement, it was an activation code. Across human space, hidden military installations began powering up. Civilian ships transformed, revealing weapon systems that had been disguised as cargo holds. Every human colony, even the smallest research outpost, activated defense systems that had been built in secret alongside their more peaceful structures. Humanity had never forgotten its violent past. They had simply chosen to present a more civilized face to the galaxy. But now, faced with the casual murder of a child, they were about to remind the universe why Earth's history was written in blood. The Morphids were about to learn what happened when you stripped away humanity's veneer of civilization and revealed the apex predator beneath. The first hint that something was catastrophically wrong came from the Zern. Their xenobiologists had the most experience studying humans, and they recognized the signs. "You don't understand," their emergency transmission to the Morphid leadership pleaded. "Humans don't just protect their young, they're neurologically hardwired for it. Their entire civilization is built around ensuring their children's future." The Morphids, still struggling to comprehend solid-form intelligence, dismissed these warnings. Surely no species would respond so dramatically to the loss of a single offspring. Their own reproduction involved splitting into thousands of droplets, with no particular attachment to any individual one. Then they detected the fleet signatures. "Impossible," the Morphid leader's translated message rippled across space. "Our scans indicate weapon yields capable of—" The message trailed off as new data poured in. The humans weren't just sending ships. They were sending planet killers. The Valdi, watching from their sector, began evacuating colonies near human space. Their military analysts had calculated the blast radius of the human weapons they could detect. Then they added another 50% to their estimates, because if there was one thing they'd learned about humans, it was that they always held something back. Across the galaxy, species that had never even met humans began preparing for war, not because they wanted to fight, but because they feared the conflict would spread. The Morphids' desperate attempts at appeasement, offerings of technology, territory, even their own young, met with continued silence. "We did not understand," the Morphid diplomatic transmission echoed uselessly across empty channels. "The solid child cessation was not intended as an act of aggression. We offer recompense according to galactic law." The response, when it finally came, was a single text message. "You should have thought of that before you killed someone's baby." In their panic, the Morphids shared the footage of the incident with other species, hoping to gain allies. This proved to be another catastrophic mistake. The sight of a child dying in vacuum while alien beings watched with scientific curiosity didn't win them any friends. Instead, it caused a diplomatic chain reaction. The Zern immediately signed an accord pledging neutrality in any coming conflict. The Valdi went further, offering their shipyards to Earth for humanitarian purposes. Even the warlike Krix, who had been considering challenging Earth's expansion, quietly backed away from their border plans. "Do you understand now?" the Zern ambassador transmitted to the Morphid leadership. "Humans are not like us. Their children are not replaceable data points. Every human alive was once a child, protected and nurtured by their entire society. They respond to threats against their young the way their ancient ancestors did, with overwhelming force." In their desperation, the Morphids revealed their full military capacity to the galactic community, hoping to demonstrate that they could defend themselves. The effect was the opposite of what they intended. Their fleet, while impressive by most standards, was suddenly dwarfed by the armada humanity had hidden away. The Valdez top military analyst summed it up in her report. The humans weren't playing nice because they had to. They were playing nice because they chose to, and now, thanks to the Morphids, they're not choosing to anymore. As the human fleet entered final attack formation, the galaxy held its breath. Species that had thought themselves advanced, civilized, beyond such primitive displays of force, found themselves facing an uncomfortable truth. They had mistaken humanity's peaceful overtures for weakness. The Morphids were about to become an object lesson in why that was a fatal mistake. Admiral Hong stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, watching tactical displays with cold precision. "All fleets report ready," her XO announced. "Quantum weapons are primed. The Morphid home system is surrounded. Send the message," Hong ordered. Across 7 star systems simultaneously, human ships decloaked. The Morphids hadn't even known cloaking technology was possible on that scale. Their sensors, previously showing empty space, now revealed enough firepower to reduce their civilization to atoms. But humanity didn't fire, not yet. Instead, they began a demonstration. The first display targeted an uninhabited moon in the Morphid home system. A single quantum weapon discharge rewrote its atomic structure. The entire celestial body transformed from solid rock into a crystalline form, then shattered into a billion glittering shards. The process took exactly 2.7 seconds. "Attention Morphid leadership," the broadcast began, transmitted in perfect Morphid wave speech. "That moon was approximately the size of your largest colony world. We could have chosen any target. Remember that." The second demonstration was more precise. A human destroyer approached one of the Morphid's orbital shipyards. A focused beam of what appeared to be normal light touched the station's outer hull. Where the beam struck, the liquid metal technology that the Morphids had evolved over millennia simply stopped. Their fluid forms froze, locked in crystalline stasis. "Your greatest evolutionary advantage," the transmission continued, "can be neutralized by technology we developed decades ago but never needed to use. Until now." The third demonstration targeted a small asteroid field. Multiple human ships fired simultaneously, their weapons coordinating with impossible precision. When they finished, the asteroids had been reorganized into a perfect replica of the New Haven colony's playground dome. The message wasn't subtle. Fear, the humans had learned in their long history, was most effective when it was creative. They weren't just showing raw power, they were demonstrating complete technological superiority in ways specifically designed to terrify the Morphids. "We can reshape matter," the broadcast continued. "We can freeze your fluid forms. We can create and destroy with equal precision. And we're showing you this because we want you to understand exactly what happens next." The Morphid leadership, their liquid forms rippling with terror, tried to rally their fleet. But the humans had saved their most frightening demonstration for last. A single human shuttle approached the Morphid defense fleet. The Morphids, desperate to show some kind of strength, fired everything they had at it. Energy weapons, particle beams, their most advanced liquid metal projectiles. All of it useless. The shuttle's shields didn't just absorb the attacks, they reflected them in complex patterns, creating a haunting light show. "Your weapons," the transmission noted casually, "are being handled by our civilian-grade defenses. This shuttle is rated for transporting schoolchildren on educational trips." The message was clear. We've been holding back. Way back. Then came the final part of the demonstration. The human fleet began a precise orbital dance, their ships moving in patterns that seemed to defy physics. As they moved, they generated a gravitational field that forced every Morphid ship into a specific formation. The result, visible from the Morphid homeworld surface, was a perfect recreation of little Raj Kumar's face in ships and stars. "Look up," the transmission commanded. "Look at the face of the child your curiosity killed. Remember it. Because if you ever harm another human child, if you ever even think about it, what happens next won't be a demonstration." The Morphid leadership, watching their mighty fleet manipulated like toys, finally understood. The humans hadn't been revealing their military technology over the years because they hadn't needed to. Everything the galaxy thought they knew about human capabilities had been carefully curated, a peaceful mask over something far more terrifying. We acknowledge our error," the Morphid leader transmitted, their usual fluid confidence replaced by rigid terror. "What are your demands?" Admiral Hong's smile was colder than the void of space. "Demands? No, you misunderstand. This isn't a negotiation. This is an education. The galaxy is going to learn what happens when you harm a human child. The only reason your civilization still exists is so you can serve as that lesson." The human fleet held their formation for exactly 1 hour, the image of Raj Kumar visible to every telescope and sensor in the sector. Then, with the same precision they'd shown throughout the demonstration, they simply vanished, their cloaking technology engaging simultaneously. But they didn't leave. The Morphids would learn later, through carefully leaked intelligence, that human stealth ships remained in their system, watching, waiting, an eternal reminder that mercy had been a choice. The galaxy changed after that day. Within a month, every spacefaring civilization had ratified the Human Child Protection Accord. Not because humans demanded it, they hadn't demanded anything. The other species wrote it themselves, desperately trying to prevent another demonstration of Earth's power. The Zern Chancellor summarized it best in his address to the Galactic Assembly. "We thought we were dealing with fellow explorers, peaceful traders who had grown beyond their violent past. We were wrong. We were dealing with sleeping giants who had chosen peace while keeping their fangs sharp." New protocols emerged spontaneously across civilized space. Ships would drop out of FTL at least 1 light-year from any human settlement. Trade vessels would power down weapon systems before entering human space. Most importantly, any vessel detecting human children aboard another ship would give it such a wide berth that new navigational terms had to be invented. The Valdi, always quick to adapt, established an entire diplomatic division dedicated to human youth cultural understanding. Their ambassadors began including warnings in their first contact packages. "If you value your civilization's existence, understand this. Humans have defeated death itself through medicine, bent space and time to their will through physics, and reversed entropy through engineering. But harm one of their children and you'll wish they'd merely killed you." Humanity didn't change its official policies. Trade continued, cultural exchanges resumed, scientific cooperation went on. But there was a new undertone to every interaction. When human diplomats spoke at the Galactic Assembly, other species representatives found themselves unconsciously holding their breath. The Morphids, once proud of their technological achievements, found themselves diplomatically isolated. No species would risk close association with them. Their civilization survived, but as a living warning sign, their every movement tracked by sensors they couldn't detect, their communications monitored by AIs they couldn't comprehend. The number of pirate attacks in human space dropped to 0. Crime syndicates that had operated for millennia suddenly added human exclusion zones to their territories. The mere rumor of a human child being aboard a transport was enough to make hardened criminals choose different targets. Humanity's military capabilities remained largely theoretical. They never had to demonstrate them again. The image of Raj Kumar's face, formed from the forced formation of the Morphid fleet, had been burned into the collective memory of galactic civilization. Archaeological expeditions decades later would note an interesting linguistic phenomenon. Across 17 different species, new words and phrases entered common usage. The Zern added a term meaning peaceful yet deadly, like humans with children. The Valdi military adapted their threat assessment protocols to include a category called human-level response, the maximum possible retaliation for any given action. But perhaps the most telling change was the subtlest. In diplomatic archives across the galaxy, first contact protocols were quietly updated. Under the section titled Critical Cultural Considerations, a new entry appeared at the top of every list. Determine presence of human children first. Everything else is secondary. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity's children were untouchable, not because of treaties or laws or military might, but because of a simple truth. A species that could show such terrifying power and still choose mercy was capable of far worse if pushed too far. 50 years later, on New Haven Colony, a small boy stood before a crystalline monument. The structure caught the light of the system's star, refracting it into patterns that danced across the colony's new dome. The monument was simple. A playground frozen in time, created from the same technology that had frozen the Morphid's liquid metal. "Who was he?" the boy asked his grandfather, who stood straight despite his advanced age. "He was the reason the galaxy learned to fear us," Commander Chen replied, his hair now white but his eyes still sharp. "And the reason they learned to respect us." The monument's plaque didn't mention the demonstration of power that followed. It didn't speak of quantum weapons or cloaked fleets. It simply read, Raj Kumar, beloved son. His life taught the galaxy that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology, our adaptability, or our intelligence. It's our capacity to love our children more than we love peace. Above them, a Morphid diplomatic vessel hung in high orbit, maintaining the required 1 light-year distance. Its crew, like all Morphid crews, would include a human cultural advisor, a requirement they had imposed upon themselves. The advisor's primary duty was simple: remind them why they feared Earth. The boy touched the crystalline structure, feeling its perfect smoothness. "Is it true that no one's ever hurt a human child in space since then?" Chen smiled, but there was steel in his eyes. "No one's been foolish enough to try." As they turned to leave, the setting sun caught the monument just right, creating a rainbow that arced across the colony's dome. Some said it was an accident of engineering. Others claimed it was intentional, a reminder that beauty could come from even the darkest moments. But every species in the galaxy understood the real message. This is what we can create. This is what we can preserve. This is what we will destroy you to protect. The universe had learned to fear Earth, not because humans were cruel, but because they loved so fiercely that even the stars themselves seemed to bend to their will. And the children of Earth slept safely under those stars, protected by the most terrifying force the galaxy had ever known: human love.